Hey, welcome to X3, One Topic 3 Pundits. I'm your host, John C. Dvorak, and I'm here with Andrew Eisner and Joe Engo. And on this episode, we're going to discuss a little bit about some of the backstory behind Steve Jobs and some of the things going on right now, including the fact that his father came out of the woodwork, who I guess they knew about before, but this guy is I guess he works at a casino.
He's a character, yeah.
He's a character. He never wanted to, I guess, cared about Steve. Now he wants to meet him.
He did say he was trying to support Steve in his endeavor by buying a Mac computer and an iPhone and an iPad. This was his way of supporting his son. But it was a strange story. I mean, this guy is Syrian, and so Steve is half Syrian, and I guess Steve doesn't want to have anything to do with him and this guy says, I'm too proud to contact Steve, and Steve apparently doesn't want to contact him, and so they've got this standoff.
But he's apparently been contacting him on his birthday to wish him happy birthday.
Is that what he's been doing now?
Who's Steve or the dad?
The dad.
So there are a lot of things coming out about, Steve and the man.
There's a lot of
funny. They look a lot alike.
Yeah, they do.
Even the bald spot.
Yeah, no, the male pattern baldness, which is supposed to be inherited from the mom.
Yeah,
so I guess
father,
that makes no sense to me that it does that all the time. But anyway, there's a lot of good and bad stories.
Yeah.
There was a top 10, I think, what was the name of that story? It was...
Top 10 unusual facts about Steve Jobs.
Yeah,
you didn't know
which
about
included a bunch of interesting little tidbits that if you didn't like Steve, you'd get a kick out of this article. Because everybody else is going on
it wasn't very flattering.
No, it wasn't flattering. But most of the stuff you read is this accolades and people coming out of the woodwork. And my favorite one, somebody says, I never met the man, but I love him, and he's the greatest thing ever. But what's killing me is the misinformation that is sliding into the scene. For example, over the weekend I was watching Sky News because I've got a feed to Sky in the UK, and the guy was doing a little story about Steve Jobs. And they made the claim, this guy, and I just couldn't get it on tape, but I wish I did. The guy, I was like stunned. The guy said Steve Jobs invented the personal computer.
Yeah, sure.
And then I've run into that more than a few times. Yeah. And then the guy went on to say that, and the invention was he also said that the Macintosh was the first commercially successful desktop computer.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even successful when it came out. I mean, it took a while, and there was a lot of, and he did, the IBM PC had been out for a couple of years, and so that was bogus. And then even on our little network here, Moxie Mo comes out and says that Steve Jobs invented the Macintosh in his parents' garage. So but this is common. I'm seeing a lot of this going on, and in fact, Apple itself contributes to this because if you remember when the IBM PC came out, they laid claim to inventing that PC, or the personal computer, when they were one of many companies and probably nowhere near being the first during that era where you had the Digital Group, the Sphere computer. There's a whole bunch of these, the Altair and all the rest. So I find that kind of fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't really do anything, didn't really innovate anything new. I mean, he was famous for saying, we saw the, personal music player and we thought we could do it better. We took a look at the phone and we thought we could do it better. So, and there's no question, the guy was, major force, and he should be, given a lot of credit, but still,
Well, look at the tablet market. There was just the same thing over and over and over again. All the tablets that looked like crap, that didn't work very well, and there was a lot of problems with them. Then he came along and said, you know what, the tablet wasn't new. Yeah. He said, we're going to make this work correctly for everybody. Now the market's exploding.
Yeah, he has an eye.
Yeah.
I think that was his skill.
That's right. Yeah.
That he could see, and I saw evidence of this way back in the 90s and the 80s, where there would be I'd go to visit somebody, and they would have some piece of technology in the corner. And it was like some weird thing I've never seen before. I thought was pretty cool, and it was something that Steve Jobs turned the guy onto. He's apparently out there digging around constantly, and he obviously saw these touch screens for the iPhone, or saw some examples of how they work, and said, this would be the way to go. And
the iPad was in production it was in development and R&D for like 10 years. They were calling it Safari Pad at that point. But they kept scrapping every single time they tried to do it because there wasn't enough battery life and the screens were terrible. And then once the technology had reached the point where they felt that they could actually create the device, then they started creating it, and then they just created a downscaled version for the iPhone and then later released the iPad.
Yeah, it was done backwards?
Yes.
I did not know that.
And there was one other thing that he did differently than a lot of people. For instance, like Microsoft, I'm reading about the Windows 8 and how they did, they researched it, they did focus groups, and they tracked everybody.
They focus group
so they're always
themselves
following, but, Steve is famous for saying, what does he say? People don't know what they want or something. I know what they want.
This is a classic market.
Actually, there's who was it? It was Henry Ford actually said that.
Yeah,
if he did a research study to try to find out what people wanted, they would say they wanted a faster horse.
There's been a lot of marketing guys that make this claim, which is that you can focus group stuff to death, but it's like doing surveys. When you call up a whole bunch of people about what they watch on television, they always tell you, PBS, I watch PBS, and I like the opera and all this stuff, and then you find they're watching Jerry Springer if you can actually spy on them. So for one thing, you cannot get accurate information from the public. You're just not going to get it. I mean, Nielsen tried their best with the boxes inside of people's houses that just actually monitored them.
Well, Apple does do research into how people use devices. Like if you read their human interface guide, the way that they say they design their interfaces is they build up a quick mock-up. Then they throw some people who've never seen this particular application in front of it, and they record how they interact with it. They take that and then they redefine it based on
Microsoft
their interactions.
does exactly the
but
same
they don't
thing.
But the thing is that they don't take their advice. They don't say, "What do you think could make this better?" They just watch and study how people interact with things.
Well,
and how people
Microsoft
can
kind
discover.
of does the same thing in their labs, but the results are wildly different.
Yeah.
And I don't know how else to put this, but there seems to be more soul in the Apple products, because I think there is somebody behind him that's saying, no, it should be this way, or I don't think this is good, or this bothers me, as opposed to Microsoft, which seems lockstep in line with what comes out of their research. It says you got to do this, you got to do that.
Well, Microsoft wants to give you every feature, every possibility, every whatever. I mean, just look at their UIs. They're clunky. They're cluttered. Apple takes it and says, you know what? These buttons don't belong here. Let's remove them. They do everything in their power to simplify the interface.
I still think it was a mistake to do the one-button mouse. I still love doing a right click. I mean, I think
right click is nice. Don't get me wrong, but if you design your UI correctly, you shouldn't need it. Honestly,
I don't know. I think everything needs a right click. I mean, I still miss a right click on phones even. I think, So I don't think they did everything perfectly, but I think Steve is going to be they're going to miss that sort of dictator that that knows what.
Right, and he also has the ability, or did when he was CEO, to just say no usually in a harsh way.
Yeah, like you're an idiot.
Well, worse than that. But he would say, and so it would. Essentially, it was a filter, so he could filter a lot of bad ideas, even though they're probably. It'll be interesting. I think the one thing which I mentioned in that MarketWatch article that you didn't seem to think much of, the possibility exists. I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in certain companies, you run into a situation where you have a mean boss, and everybody's like scared to death of this guy, and then a nice boss comes in, and next thing you know, you get all these ideas and all this stuff. The company all of a sudden is doing better, because the nice boss cuts everyone loose. That doesn't last forever, because the nice boss eventually says, this guy, all right, let's just run him over. And you've run into good boss, nice boss, bad cop, good cop kind of phenomenon. So it's possible.
Oh man, liberated.
It's possible that if Apple employees are liberated from an oppressive regime, that the next thing you know, we're going to just be inundated with all kinds of cool stuff.
Theory.
Well,
that is good theory, but I mean, look at the MacBook Air. They went through 100 case designs before they finally settled on the last one. Could you imagine being the guy who's making those cases? I mean, at what point would you say, this is ridiculous, I just created 60 cases and none of them are good enough?
Yeah. It reminds me of there used to be I know you guys did before your time, but there was in the 50s.
Maybe his time.
In the late 50s, there was Richie Valens was a famous singer who did a song called La Bamba, was a big hit. Sure. And I was listening to the guy who produced that record at one time, or somebody who was in the studio where the record was produced, and the song is a very simple song that's got really nothing that needs to be overproduced. And apparently they made him sing the thing 50 to 60 times to get the right, and if you listen to the outtakes, they're all the same. So it's like sometimes there's wheel spinning of changing the case design a million times because the slope should be a little more like this, not like this, doesn't feel right. This kind of thing, maybe overdoing it.
Well, Apple's perfectionist, though. I mean, look at all their products. I mean, there is no seams for the most part. I mean, there's a couple screws here and there, but I mean, compared to now, all these other manufacturers are starting to follow along because those designs are really nice and they work.
But it's also like that story. Do we have time for a quick story?
Go.
So the editor comes into his boss and submits his story, and then comes back and says, "Did you have time to read it?" And the boss holds it up and says, "Is this the best you can do?" So the guy says, "Maybe I can go but do a little better." Goes back, rewrites it. Next time he comes in, the boss says, "Is this the best you can do?" He says, "I can probably polish it up." So this goes on and on. So he finally says, "Is this the best you can do?" He says, "Yeah, this is the best you can do." I said, "Okay, now I'll read it."
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I think it'd be better. The story should be rewritten. So the guy says, "Yeah, this one's okay," and he said, "Well, that was the first one I wrote." Anyway,
All right.
which is more like editors. You've been watching X3.